Welcome to of Mics and Memory Cards, a complete rundown of the PlayStation 1 game library, all 4,105 of them. My name is Tyler, and today I am joined in the fog enveloping us by...
My name is...
And I'm Kameron. Have you seen a little girl, short, black hair, about this tall?
No, but I've seen someone who looks exactly like her who may or may not also be her. Today we're talking about Silent Hill, a game all of us understand perfectly. What is everybody's history with the Silent Hill series?
Well, I started playing this game about 2 weeks ago, and that is my history with the Silent Hill franchise.
Whoa.
I never played PT. I never played any other Silent Hill game. They scared me as a kid. And then my wife in college, I believe, or maybe shortly thereafter, tried playing one of them and just hated the controls. And when this woman feels a certain way about certain things, it just doesn't really get let up on. It's every single time. If I were to be like, hey, I'm thinking about maybe playing Silent Hill, it would be like, you're not going to like it. Those controls are so bad. And she's not wrong. And so I am brand new to the games. This most recent Halloween, I watched the movie for the first time. So I am coming at this from a Silent Hill cinephile perspective today.
I'm hoping I can convince you to continue the series. I'm going to betray my love for Silent Hill in general. I would put it among my top 5 franchises total. The first 4 specifically have really clicked with me. I've played Origins and Shattered Memories, which are the 2 that followed that initial 4 by that initial team. I've tried playing the 360 PS3 games and fell off them. They're quite bad. And then I've even played the most recent, it's called A Short Message.
The free one,
I did
right?
play through it in anticipation of this podcast. Yeah, it's free. We'll talk about it, maybe. But I have a lot of love for this series. I will tell you why the controls are bad and why it's intentional and why everything that's happening here is being done with intentionality and purpose and why it's all artistically perfect.
Sweet.
I cannot wait to hear it.
Prior to this, I've only played Silent Hill 2 all the way to completion. And I think I did like the demo for Silent Hill 3. And then this is actually the first time I've played the original Silent Hill. I haven't played PT, which is kind of a bummer because now there's just no way to do it.
That's how I feel too.
And my only experience with the movie was the part where Pyramid Head rips the skin off of that one lady. That's all I've ever seen of that. That's the only scene I've seen.
Yeah. I should mention I have seen the first movie as well. We're going to talk about the movie later, and it may surprise you to learn that I have strong opinions.
No way.
But we'll get to that.
Faithful
There's also,
adaptation.
has anyone played the bad pachinko games exclusive to Japan? Really?
Yes.
Why
from
not?
All the trips I make to Japan to try out the many varieties of pachinko games available to me. I am, yes, a huge fan of the Apple TV Plus original series, Pachinko.
That's sitting in my queue right now.
Is there legit a series?
Yeah, apparently it's really good too. I actually haven't watched it, but I do hear it's like really beautiful and very romantic. And
damn.
it's just called Pachinko.
I watched a video of about pachinko and just like how it has such a chokehold on like the Japanese community.
It's huge. It's the biggest thing that just has no parallel here.
Yeah.
We don't have anything like that in the West, really.
And they
like, you
also-
think a Dave and Buster's is ripe for pachinkoing.
Right? And they also, because they also bypass, or there's like a loophole to allow it because it's technically gambling and there's no
Right.
like gambling in Japan, but they've somehow gone around it. I don't know. I don't remember the exact mechanics of it though.
But this is why I think Tyler's very wrong, that there's no equivalent of it in America. In fact, we have entire cities built on the industry of gambling. I would argue Japan lacks an equivalent.
I see what you're saying. I mean, pachinko is literally those coin pusher games that you'd see in Chuck E. Cheese's where you put the token in and like maybe it'll do something, maybe it won't, and then you just have to keep putting in tokens until you get more tokens. It's the same concept.
But with little balls.
Little balls.
Little silver balls.
It's like the balls you go around the street and exchange them for a prize or maybe for cash, but it's a different business, so it doesn't count as gambling.
Yeah,
kind
that's
of the same way a
that's
soap land is not prostitution because they only rub your pee-pee with, I think, their legs. Do you guys know what I'm talking about, or is that just totally out of pocket?
No, I know what it is. I've played the Yakuza games.
I only know it from Like a Dragon, Yakuza, yeah.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay. All right.
We're starting off strong today, guys.
So Silent Hill.
I'd like to take a minute. This is a longer narrative than I had initially anticipated. A lot of Japanese games are harder to find information about just because of, well, the language barrier, even if there are publications or videos about the development, it's harder for me to locate them because I don't speak Japanese, but also those companies can tend to be more secretive. Like if we were trying to research the history of Nintendo games, sometimes we'd just be shut out entirely. There's no way to even tell when development starts at times. Luckily, there's a lot of information on Silent Hill, so I have a couple of sources I just want to credit really quickly.
All right.
The biggest one is by a YouTuber named The Gaming Muse. It's called Creating Silent Hill, How the Team Silent Newbies Created a Horror Classic Game Documentary. Kind of a clickbaity title, but it is a full original 2-hour documentary about the making of the first Silent Hill.
Jesus.
So if you ever want any details fleshed out about what I'm talking about, I'm sort of skimming what they developed, so I would recommend watching that. There's a making of Silent Hill video from PlayStation Underground, which was the PlayStation magazine back in the day. That one's got a lot of edgy 90s cuts. Get ready to hear the word edgy a bunch again. There is also a Silent Hill 1999 developer interview translated by Shmupulations, who I've used for almost every game we've covered so far. They do great translations of old Japanese articles or book excerpts, and then also just the Silent Hill wiki and silenthillmemories.net. So thanks, everybody.
Let's go.
Couldn't do it without you.
Wow, the works cited section of the podcast is my favorite part to listen to.
That's really what brings in the listeners. When we do the bonus episodes, it's just going to be all those spliced together so people have a reading list.
I listen to podcasts because I love reading.
We'll begin with a quote that begins the game as well. The fear of blood tends to create fear of the flesh. I cannot express how delighted I am to cover the inaugural title in one of my favorite game series of all time. Upon release, Silent Hill marked a distinct shift in horror video games. Whereas horror gaming previously had taken inspiration from schlocky B-movies a la Resident Evil or Giallo, shots, first correction.
Giallo.
Thank you. Whereas horror gaming had previously taken inspiration from schlocky B-movies a la Resident Evil or Giallo blood-soaked scream fest like Clock Tower. I think I still pronounced it wrong.
You did. You asked for a correction, and then you went back and said it the exact same way.
I forgot it. I'm like a Ron Burgundy type with this script.
If you want to try one more time, how do you say my name?
Jacob?
Yes. So Giallo.
Yeah,
like say it like it's
I'm gonna type in the pronunciation.
That works.
Giallo. I've done that with a couple other things before.
Giallo.
I'm gonna be embarrassed when I find out that apparently I actually do have it wrong and it's a Giallo.
Whereas horror gaming had previously taken inspiration from schlocky B-movies a la Resident Evil or Giallo. Did I pronounce it wrong again?
No, you got it. You got it right that time.
That was it.
Giallo, blood-soaked scream fest like Clock Tower, Silent Hill approached terror from an existential angle, making something closer to a Eraserhead than it was to any Romero zombie film. And while it's been overshadowed by its admitted masterpiece of a sequel, it would be an absolute mistake to sleep on Silent Hill 1, a game that stands so deeply frightening in its own right, with a vibe that only gets more frequently imitated as the years go by and the quote-unquote low-poly horror movement grows more prevalent. People now are realizing what Team Silent, the developers of the game, knew all the way back when they started the project in 1996, what they knew at the start. That things are scariest when they are not fully visible, being only suggestions of the recognizable. The scariest monsters are the ones you can barely make out, silhouetted in a heavy fog.
That was the one thing I realized during this playthrough, is that so many of the things that scared me were literally just noises that I heard, and then it wasn't connected to any particular monster that you fight, because those I'm not super afraid of, except for maybe the first time you run into them, because it's like new and you're like, what the fuck is that thing just standing in the corner there? But then most of the enemies, at least as far as my gameplay went, the enemies go down pretty easily. It doesn't take a ton of ammo, and you can stomp on them after, which I didn't know until I got to the hospital section, so I wasted a ton of ammo in the school. But the things that scared me, other than like the jump scares, were just some of the ambient noises, and I guess if it counts as the soundtrack, because I guess depending on the room you go to, it's like that ching 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 ching, and that was what terrified me.
I was particularly stunned the first time you go over to the very first save spot in the cafe, and then when you turn away from it, it gives you a brief angle outside the window, and you see the flapping wings, but like for a second, and then the angle shifts again, and I was all like, oh, that was bad. It was scary.
I think what I like about the horror in Silent Hill is that it doesn't rely on jump scares, but it does utilize them effectively. So right after that same scene, so you see the thing out the window for just a second, and then it cuts back where you can't see it anymore. Yes. And then a minute later, I think after you grab the gun from the counter maybe, it crashes through the window, and then all of a sudden everything is chaos. You haven't figured out the controls yet. Yep. Very similar to, frankly, what Resi 4 does when it throws you in the village for the first time, and you learn by being engulfed in chaos.
Yeah, the burning effigy.
Yes, exactly. I think Silent Hill does a kind of macro form of that, where it's gonna be clumsy, you're gonna feel freaked out, and to be fair, you never get real combat elegance from the game, and you as a player can sort of figure out what you're doing, but it's clear that Harry doesn't, which again I think is one of the game's strengths. But in that moment, I've played this game, this would be my third time now, I've played the rest of the series, and you still kind of fumble, because you're like, wait, so R1 and then this, but it doesn't, it kind of auto-aims, but it doesn't auto-aim super well. I think it's really effective.
I've sprinted directly into the monster instead of shooting at it because I pushed the wrong button, or, shoot at nothing when I'm trying to run. I do understand the gripe that the controls are kind of shitty, but at the same time, I do like how each button is mapped to something. So like you can't get totally lost. Like there is a weapon button, there is a run button, there is a button specifically for your map, which I am always a fan of.
Yes, I am too. The very first that first battle with the winged creature, I play these on my PSP, and I could not figure out how to actually fire the gun. I could aim it, but I couldn't figure out what the button to fire it was. And I was really struggling. And eventually I found that in the game menu itself, it would like pull up the controls, and I was like, oh, it's moving the thumbstick, and that operates left or right as like R2, L2. And it made it far more enjoyable, but I died 5 times to that winged beast because I could not figure out how to pull the trigger on my gun, which is a hilarious visual to me, that a man's just like got a gun but can't do anything with it.
Paralyzed with fear, maybe he just like keeps missing the trigger.
Like tapping the top of it, like where's the button? It should be a button. And there's a trigger here, but it's too tough to pull.
I want to ask before we continue any further, because I don't think, Tyler, that you would write this outline in this way, but have you seen Eraserhead?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just making sure. That seemed like a unique choice to me. It doesn't comport with Silent Hill for me, but maybe my experience with it is a little bit...
You don't think so?
I'm trying to find that connection. Maybe I make it by the end of this podcast. You've convinced me.
We'll see.
I was just curious.
I may be a bit out of pocket, but some of that comes from the influences of the folks who made the game itself. So before we get too deep into the developers, we should touch on Konami, the company, because this is our first Konami joint, surprisingly. The game's publisher and unfortunately still current rights holder of the Silent Hill IP. Now, Konami these days has a reputation for shitting out bad ports of old games, shitting out pachinko cabinets based on classic games, who could forget Castlevania and its erotic violence, and known for firing Hideo Kojima. In the mid-90s, they were a powerhouse publisher, second to perhaps only Nintendo and Capcom in putting out the highest quality titles coming out of Japan. I think that's a fair assessment, right? Maybe Square as well.
I would say so, yeah.
If we're talking about the mid-90s, you undeniably...
Oh, yeah, those were the usual suspects.
Yeah, Squaresoft and Enix as well. But you're right, and Konami maintains that all the way, basically up until the firing of Kojima.
More or less. All Japanese, well, I don't want to give too big a blanket statement, but a lot of Japanese companies struggled with the 360 PS3 era, where the bigger blockbusters and some of the higher critically reviewed games definitely shifted over to Western markets. But right before then, the PS1, PS2 era, I feel like Konami was one of those companies where if you saw that logo, especially in the 16-bit era, that logo, it shoots a little beam across the screen and then lowers, and then there's a little chime that pops in. There's something so nostalgic to me about that I, even with all their pachinko cabinets, I just can't hate the guys. Well,
they were literally on top of their game back then. And it also goes into the arcade scene. They had Dance Dance Revolution at the time, as well as all the rest of the music. What are they called? The Bimani series. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I think it's Bimani.
Guitar Freaks, I think, was another one of them. I think there was a drummer game too, and
I forgot that was all them. Yeah, super multi-layered. Oh, the beat 'em ups. Yeah. Definitely. The Turtles games were them, right?
Yeah, the Turtles games, the Simpsons game, and the X-Men game.
So Konami is another one of those Japanese game companies that was founded prior to the advent of gaming itself, beginning life as a jukebox rental and repair business founded in 1969, though it didn't pick up the Konami name until 1973, the name being a portmanteau of its three founders' names: Kagemasa Yozuki, Yoshinobu Nakama, and Tatsuo, oh man, why do I put all these in? Tatsuo Miyasako. The first coin-op was released in 1977 called Blockyard. Out of necessity, we're going to skip through a lot of the history, but suffice it to say, they were a big deal in the arcades more or less from the get-go, and brought those successes to the home division with the NES/Famicom, the MSX computer system. Their biggest franchises of the 18 and 16-bit were Contra, Castlevania, Gradius, Goemon, and a string of licensed beat-em-ups like The Simpsons and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Mm-hmm. There, I even referenced it. Now, well, you may think that the development of Silent Hill was affected by Konami's publishing of Metal Gear Solid in 1998, which released a year prior to Silent Hill. From what I can tell, this other seminal release in storytelling didn't actually affect Silent Hill much. Team Silent, the group of developers within Konami's internal development team, actually began work in September of 1996, at least according to one developer's resume. It seems that work on Silent Hill went on in conjunction with other internal projects at the time, and the budget was low enough that Konami didn't seem to pay the team much mind, and sort of let them develop with a bit of freedom. And let's talk about that team. Here are the 4 original members of Team Silent, most of whom are coming off, bizarrely, the cute-em-up Sexy Parodius.
I like the term "cute 'em up." That's fantastic.
Had you never heard that before?
No.
No, me neither.
Oh yes, Parodius and Cotton, I think, are the big two.
Oh, okay.
But anytime you see a cute anime girl in a bullet hell, it's a cute 'em up.
That's fantastic.
Learn something new every day.
So they went from the cute 'em up to one of the most seminal horror releases of all time.
They were just so sick of that shit. Just like, I'm tired of fucking cutesy anime girl bullshit. Let's change things up.
I think
I want
maybe
horror in small town Maine.
they understood the inherent horror of small anime girls.
Yo, I could believe that.
That's valid. What is it, Midori Magica? I haven't seen it
Madoka
yet.
Magica.
Madoka Magica.
There it
God,
is.
you fucking casual.
You guys heard of Dragon Ball? Great show.
I don't know. I've been watching this one called One Piece. Have you guys heard of that one?
I heard it's real.
The One Piece? Yeah, I started watching it on Netflix.
Oh, no. My favorite part of Cowboy Bebop is John Cho. The central figure of Silent Hill is Keiichiro Toyama. He's the director and writer of Silent Hill 1, which was also his first game in either of those two roles, which is something that even he questioned the logic in, previously only working as a graphic and character designer. But following Silent Hill 1, he would leave Konami to work on the Siren series, perhaps the only scarier series than Silent Hill, which is too scary for me. I haven't played it. Following that, he would go on to create cult classic duology Gravity Rush, which is a personal favorite. Toyama is the central character in our story, and while Silent Hill really is a team effort, it's absolutely his direct vision that led to the ultimate product that we got.
Nice.
I am so deeply jealous of this time in Japan when you could just waltz, happenstance, trip your way into a writing and directing job. I think that's why, the end of the day, the 90s really were a poison pill. You know, it's you thought it was cool, you thought it was great, it promised a lot of good things, and then just none of it came into fruition.
The dream of the 90s. It's not alive in Portland anymore. Please stop moving here. Up next is Naoto Oshima, a graphic and effect programmer who'd previously made the water effects for International Track and Field and did a lot of the light and camera work for Silent Hill. He left the industry entirely, from what I can tell, after Silent Hill 4. He may work in the industry, but just not in the production portion of it. He'd probably have shifted to something internally in Konami, but otherwise he drops off the map after SH4. I can't find anything.
That's honestly kind of too bad. I feel like he might be the unsung hero here.
Yes, and it's not sexy, but, well, maybe it is, but what he did for Silent Hill really defined a lot of what this game is, which would then define a lot of what the series would become moving forward based on that lighting work, which to me is really integral for the vibes.
Yeah.
Well, I would also say same for the camera work, since it used, you know, those like weird static camera angles like Resident Evil did. But the one thing I noticed with this one is, especially in the beginning when you first go into that alley, it does a little mixture of both those like weird static camera angles, but it also follows you in like a weird way, like it.
Yeah.
Like, it almost goes upside down at some point, and it's like
It's all very
very
situational.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very
Yes.
disoriented.
I was going to say it
way of following
discombobulates you. And
Thank you.
On
That's what it
purpose.
was.
The third member is Akihiro Imamura, who was a programmer for Silent Hill 1, who'd previously only worked as a programmer on International Track and Field and Sexy Parodius. He stuck around until Silent Hill 4 and then also left the industry. So not only do we have Sexy Parodius, the cute 'em up, we also have like a 3D Olympic simulator, and that's what people are coming off of. And then the last original member of Team Silent is Takeyoshi Sato, the CGI creator of Silent Hill 1 and 2. He has a really distinct style that you see just in these two games. They try and ape it a little bit moving forward, but the face models especially, you can tell, are his. They look a lot better than the rough CGI cutscenes of the day. He'd previously only worked as an animator for Sexy Parodius, and now he works for goddamn Nintendo as a visual producer. He's described by Keiichiro Toyama as a strange man with a bitter smile. And by the way, he was self-taught when it came to 3D art, having only worked on 2D and pixel stuff previous to Silent Hill. He would stick around after midnight at the Konami offices and eventually began showing older coworkers how to do 3D art. Eventually, he got on Team Silent by threatening to stop helping those older coworkers who often took credit for his work unless he was put on a larger scale project. So while he's not officially billed on anything 3D related prior to Silent Hill 1, we can assume that some of Konami's 3D output he had some hand in. If I had to guess, I would say like that 3D castle from the start of Symphony of the Night. I would say that's probably him.
So not only can you fall upwards into a writer-director seat, you can also fall into an animation seat in the video game industry in the 90s. Nice.
You can fall upwards into anything in video games in the 90s.
Oh, and what a thing we miss, that there's not that pathway. It seems to me nowadays, if you couldn't be a part of a small team and be so limited in your experience and create something so unique that would capture people's attention. Anymore, you would have to cut your teeth working for a massive corporation. Like you wouldn't be able to go from being Team Silent to Nintendo. You would have to go from Nintendo and realize what a shitty workplace working in these giant places is, and then go and do your own small thing, only to realize that that's incredibly stressful before you finally end up putting a fucking bullet in your... I'm done.
The team, of course, is larger than that, encompassing quite a few background designers and animators. Moby Games lists the total professional roles at 81, but a majority of those are actually just on the sound team. A making-of video taken around the end of development from PlayStation Underground. The little office space that the group was crammed into lists 15 staff. It says, like, on the text, something like, there are 15 people here. It's very direct. And so I get the idea that the core team of Silent Hill was made up of about 15 folks.
There's a great movie called American Honey, if you guys are familiar with it. It's got Riley Coe, Shia LaBeouf, I forget actually, Sasha Lane, maybe. But one of my favorite filmmakers, Andrea Arnold, and the credits of that movie, in lieu of doing like directed by, written by, starring, it's just the names of the people who worked on it, just no titles or anything. I'm sure like there's like a roll credits later on, but like the immediate aftermath is it's just like, hey, these are the people who put this together. That's what this reminds me of.
That's kind of cool.
I really like it. I think it celebrates the ensemble more than like the hierarchy.
There were specific roles on this one. That reminds me more of like Naughty Dog. Just lists Crash Bandicoot as by Naughty Dog.
That's fair.
Just a list of names. Now, the four men mentioned before were the original Team Silent, put together by Konami to work on a game simply titled Horror Adventure in May of 1996. And then some of them started working more earnestly in September 96, I think is what I can tell from... We referenced there was the resume from before. It's hard to track some of this stuff. The intention was to ride Resident Evil's coattails, but to do so in full 3D rather than use pre-rendered and fixed camera angles. Toyama's goal was to always use darkness as a primary source of anxiety, and his original plan was to use 2D textures that were shaded on the sides to mimic darkness. Oshima, however, created a demo using point lighting, which is an imitation of how light works in the real world, originating from a point, then fading as you get farther away. Now, this sounds pretty normal by today's standards, but this had never been done on the PS1 before. Previously, lighting effects were manually added, which is an effect called vertex coloring. Color information just shifts along the vertices of an object from lighter to darker shading. And to be fair, this is still mostly what Silent Hill does. It's just that the flashlight is the only thing affecting the vertex coloring of the environment, which then changes in real time. It's not from a fixed point where the backgrounds affected by, say, a torch in a castle don't really need to change. That's the coloring they're gonna be. The light is actively changing the textures on the ground as Harry's moving around. And this is the reason Silent Hill has such a short draw distance with all the fog and the darkness. Those lighting effects take up an incredibly high amount of resources. All of Silent Hill that we think of as iconic actually stems from a desire to create lighting effects, to create a fear of the dark.
You know, I'm coming around on the Eraserhead comparison already.
Tyler's doing finger guns. Just wanted to point that out to y'all.
As Owen Wilson says in Cars, cha-chow.
It's ka-chow.
Also, Owen Wilson isn't in Cars. That's Lightning McQueen who says it. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, kids listening who believe in Santa Claus and Lightning McQueen.
Lightning, I am Speed McQueen.
Yeah, they're both red, Tyler.
Wait 10 years and then play the game. Another major influence Silent Hill had that other games at the time might not have had is Toyama and Sato were hired to Konami right out of art school, giving them a highbrow sensibility, a term which I use here endearingly as a former former art kid school myself, as a former art school kid myself, Toyama was actually a film student, and so brought specific inspiration from David Lynch, Jan Svankmajer, Alejandro Jodorowsky, and Dario Argento. Much of the occult mentality comes from Imamura, who I think was the one on the team who was less interested in the fancier psychological stuff and just liked aliens and spooky symbols and the X-Files.
I can't. I'm sorry. I want to shut the fuck up about it. Alejandro Jodorowsky and Dario Argento. I'm a piece of shit. I can't. I'm sorry. This is just
I'm
who
not
I
even
am.
the snooty one here.
I know. I'm like, do you realize how uncomfortable my own skin feels to correct you on the pronunciation of these people's names? Last episode, we established what it's like. Or no, the episode I'm currently editing, it's every 20 minutes you're like, well, folks, this is what it's like living with OCD. But now, for whatever reason, you got on medication and you can't pronounce a goddamn name correctly.
Yeah, it's true. But I don't want to kill myself. There's also fairly obvious nods. To American horror writers. Every street in Silent Hill is named after them. Toyama cites his primary book influences as Phantom by Dean Koontz, Stinger by Robert R. McCammon, and perhaps obviously The Mist by Stephen King. I don't want to go over it too thoroughly since 28 writers are referenced in streets across the series, but a couple shout-outs are folks like Robert Bloch, writer of Psycho, Michael Crichton, Ray Bradbury, and Richard Bachman, who was Stephen King's pseudonym for his more extreme books earlier in his career.
I can't believe I didn't pick up on that at all. I feel like a moron.
Now who doesn't get names right?
I just went completely over my head. I think I've walked past Bradbury Street over and over and over and just didn't think anything of it.
It was Bradbury that cued it off for me.
Yeah, Kameron famously can't read text that's not on a screen. So
I actually just can't read in general. Just nothing. Just never learned that part.
He grew up on an island, folks.
I did grow up on an island, and that heavily contributed to my lack of literacy. In any form.
The only language I understand is the surf and the sun and
the language of aloha.
Unless text is mapped out in ukulele music, I can't understand it.
Yeah, I just read it along on the staff, but it only works for the first, what is it, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, six letters, because that's all the notes that in music. So I can read the word face, and that's about it.
That's crazy. We almost made it through an entire episode without one of you bragging about how you know music.
The only street in Silent Hill that is not named after an author is Borden Street, which is named after Lizzie Borden, a woman famously accused of murdering her family with an axe. Ooh, spooky. But to go back to The Mist, originally Toyama's intention was to make a game version of The Mist itself.
That explains the fog.
Konami attempted to get in touch with Stephen King, but was unsuccessful, and at one point Toyama's boss just told him, go to America, find Stephen King, and convince him to let us make this game.
He should have tried reaching out to Richard Bachman instead.
I would have done it.
That's so great. What a great story. It's like, you want to make a game, just go to America, find the most celebrated author in American history, and convince him to let you make a game of arguably his most seminal work. We'll see you in a week.
Just bring him a big pile of cocaine and you might convince him. No, Stephen King wasn't. I don't think he was still doing coke in the mid-90s. I'm not sure. Obviously, this didn't happen. Well, the coke thing did, but Toyama going to America to convince Stephen King did not happen. But after a shift of producers, that original concept was just tossed out entirely, and the story was completely reworked into something original, although the influence The Mist had on the project is fairly obvious, i.e. monsters hiding in the fog that covers a small town in Maine. This is also where the series got a bit of its dream logic. The world and game systems were developed for a different story. They were being developed for a significant amount of time, thinking that they were going to be used for The Mist. So some things in the final product don't completely make sense, but they leaned into this potential absurdity instead of trying to work against it.
Very smart choice.
But all of this is contrasted with the realism of the game world. Silent Hill is made up of real-world locations, kinda. I really like this quote from Toyama about this distinction, taken from an older print interview around the time of a release. This is a long quote, but I think it's important to the development of the game overall.
The more one includes realistic elements in their game, the more the remaining game elements stand out in sharp relief. Think about it. In a game, you don't know whether time is flowing or not. Shooting things doesn't destroy them, you don't get hungry, you don't have to go to the bathroom. Of course, you can say, it's just a game, and be done with it. But when you consider the unique undulation of emotions, from anxiety to fear to relief, that games can stimulate, I think the atmosphere is closer to what we experience when sleeping, in dreams and nightmares. And adventure games are the equivalent of someone else's dreams. We settled on the interpretation that what you would see and feel in this game would all be like a reconstruction of fragments of memory. Therefore, in Silent Hill, there are no modern weapons or creatures, no spaceships or heroes. Instead, we opted for nostalgic streets that trigger a feeling of deja vu, seemingly normal people, and strange, ugly monsters. That way of thinking became a whole methodology that extended to every aspect of the game, including the story and direction. Usually, adventure games will employ a so-called cinematic presentation, but in this game, the player gathers fragments, which they then try to piece together in their mind, and I imagine this to feel like a dream, in the way dreams resemble a connected chain of unrelated fragments.
Great reading. Wonderful.
Thank you, buddy.
The team grew to a size of about 10 by mid-1997, with a few new hires also just out of school. One of these new artists was Masahiro Ito. A lot of monster designs originated with him, and looking at his work now, it's clear that a lot of the distinct visual style Silent Hill formulated was because of him specifically. However, his art was only visual, and he had no idea how to program. Toyama would later jokingly call his tech skills, quote, terrible.
What a noob. Who's this fucking kid?
Get wrecked, Ito.
You guys got awfully vicious.
I'm sorry. I'm just agreeing with Toyama.
He's very important to the overall vibe of the game. The actual name of the game comes from around this time period as well. An original name was Incubator, which I think is fucking dope, but Toyama didn't like. One of the developers was from a small Japanese town called Shizuoka, which translates literally into English as Quiet Hill. Same difference. They picked the one that sounded cooler.
Ooh, I don't know. I'm kind of like Quiet Hill.
Yeah.
You don't play a lot of games that start with Q.
That's ultimately what it is. I think I just like the word quiet, which famously Hideo Kojima also likes. I know he's not the guy here, but there's that Konami connection. Don't worry about it.
It's around early 1998 that the development staff was fully fleshed out by folks moved over from the recently released Twin Bee RPG, which is another extremely cute game when you look it up.
There's a Twin Bee RPG?
There is. It's Japanese only.
Oh, that explains it. I gotta look this up now.
Technically, if we cover all 4,105 of them, that'll be one of them.
Let's fucking go.
There's some early E3 builds from around this time as well, May 1998, that show a game that is obviously incomplete, but looks quite a bit like the Silent Hill we know today. This was also the first time that the game was shown to the public. Funnily enough, Silent Hill as a game and concept was received with lukewarm reception, but the CGI cutscenes were seen as somewhat of a technological breakthrough, something we can attribute almost solely to Takeyoshi Sato, the strange man with the bitter smile. That CG, by the way, was all done by hand. Because of the time involved in building the characters, many of them were created before work on the story was finalized. Because he may not have known exactly what to make characters look like, many characters resemble existing horror characters. Lisa's outfit is the same as a nurse in The Exorcist 3. Surprisingly good movie, I recommend it. The one jump scare involves that nurse. And Alessa looks quite a bit like a child in The Legend of Hell House.
I just want to jump in. The Exorcist 3 totally rules. It is.
Thank you. I'm glad you agree with me.
It is absolutely nothing like the original Exorcist. But what it does, as far as being a sick-ass detective story, anchored by Is it George C. Scott who's in that?
Is it? I think it might be him and Brad Dourif.
Yes. Oh,
it is George C. Scott.
He's so
Brad Dourif's
good.
so good,
And Brad Dourif,
he's so good.
oh, he embodies that demon so thoroughly. He's one of the best ever. Okay, I'm done. Exorcist 3 rules. Check it out.
I was sitting here. I was actually kind of clenched up, like, oh no, Jacob's gonna shit all over it.
No.
I thought you would too.
Nobody watch Exorcist 2.
We can all agree Exorcist 2 is bad, but Exorcist 3 is good.
Also, Exorcist 3 is written and directed. So the original The Exorcist is written by a man. I literally just had his name and I completely spaced on it.
William Peter
Blatty. Yes, William Peter Blatty wrote the original Exorcist. He also wrote the book that's based on, but then he also wrote the sequel to it called Legion, which he himself adapts and directs in the form of The Exorcist 3. And that movie would be remembered so much better if it wasn't called The Exorcist 3 and was just called Legion. All of this is besides the point. These Japanese...
Legion, or if it was just Exorcist 2, that could have been a series that people really hung their hats on.
There already was an Exorcist 2, and it sucks.
I know. And that's the... if they had just made Legion and anyway.
You're right. If they had just called it Exorcist 2, like the Suicide Squad. It's just, this is The Exorcist 2. I'm on board. I get you. I see you.
We joked about having like a list of recommendations, but by the end of this, we'll have a bunch of film stuff to recommend.
Let it be said, this Japanese quad really has good taste.
Yes, I think we can all agree on that, definitely. And while there's only 10 minutes of FMV, it took Sato 2 years to design the characters and craft these scenes on his own.
Oh my God.
This is because 1 second of CGI took 3 to 4 hours of rendering time. Added up, this is 2,000 hours spent just on rendering alone.
Holy crap.
I have no idea what rendering even looked like back then, because nowadays you can render and like I keep like a rough eye on my computer to make sure things go according to plan. But back then, I mean, technology is just so comparatively rudimentary. Do you have to sit there the entire time and just watch it render? You don't even...
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think I would guess that he left it overnight. If I had to guess, I bet that he would like work and then like turn it off for the 4 hours that he would go home, because it seems like all these Japanese developers either sleep at their desks or go home for like 2 hours maximum and then come back. I would like to think that he did it overnight, but maybe he didn't. I don't know.
He slept near it. He slept near the computer, just
one hand on
just
the
in
mouse.
case something went wrong.
He was clearly watching David Lynch films while waiting for his films to render.
Toyama and a producer attended the E3 in Atlanta, Georgia, where Toyama was mugged for $2 and then wandered the American streets discombobulated, hungry, and confused. After that, they took a research trip to Chicago, where Toyama was brought around town without a translator. He wandered around some desolate areas, taking photos and videos of the quiet desperation of the American city, painted with signs in a language he didn't understand. There's some interesting tidbits to add about the programming. Since the camera would shift with the character and sometimes shift to a predetermined point of view, one of the biggest issues Oshima would face was with Z-buffering, which is the process of the programming determining what visuals take priority, i.e. what model is visible on the top layer. Additionally, another programmer named Awaku Hirayuki devised a system to indicate critical health without the interruption of UI, and so developed a system for a heartbeat to pulse through the DualShock controller when a character was at low health, which is actually a process that Konami patented with his name.
Nice.
Huh, cool, good for him.
I feel like I've seen that specifically used in other games, so I don't know if they have to pay royalties to Konami, which seems very in line with that company, or if the patent expired eventually. I don't know.
I'm going to try and think of what other games utilize that now.
Owaku also served as the puzzle designer, almost as a de facto thing. You see, he was the event planner, meaning that events, meaning things that are triggered by player actions, like a bridge lowering because a key is inserted, were programmed directly by him. Since he'd be programming the lock and key aspects anyway, they just left it to him to build the puzzles in the first place. His notes can actually be found in dummy images in the data of some early builds of the game, with writing over the images explaining how things should look, presumably sending that to artists. So you can find early versions of there's like a pre-rendered zoom in when you look at like the doghouse or a keypad. He had rudimentary versions of that, and you can find in some of those early files, I think a demo and like maybe the E3 build leaked. He's just got like garish blue text over it that says like, the key would be up here with a little arrow pointing. The town was primarily designed by former cameraman turned game developer Isao Takahashi, and the Nightmare World was by Masahiro Ito, who we mentioned earlier. I think what's distinctive about the two is they did not have experience in game design prior to this game. Because of this, the game's layouts don't feel like game layouts. It feels like an actual town. And then the Nightmare variation feels like a town put through a bloody, rusted paper shredder and then haphazardly glued back together. And to me, this is another thing that sets Silent Hill apart. The game feels like it takes place in an actual location, like the maps were taken out of real schools and hospitals. But on top of that sits a game philosophy that uses those maps intelligently to make an intended path through the world. Their primary influences were also films. Hellraiser, which is obvious in retrospect. I watched Hellraiser recently and just pointed and went, oh, it's Silent Hill. That first bit where Harry runs through that initial alleyway. Like, there's a scene in Hellraiser where she's in, like, a hospital bed that is, like, exactly that same thing. And then their other primary influence was Jacob's Ladder, which I haven't seen, but it's been on my list forever. And then, of course, the meme fact of the podcast, if you don't know it already, the school in Silent Hill is modeled after the school in Kindergarten Cop.
I did not know that. I didn't catch that at all.
I'm utterly dumbfounded.
I want to say you can find a poster that describes Kindergarten Cop. There's a couple movie posters up around the town as well.
Yeah.
One of which just apes Indiana Jones. So there's a few spots where they make the movies they liked very well known and other spots where they hide it a little bit. But the Kindergarten Cop thing isn't something they ever really tried to hide. But why Kindergarten Cop?
Somebody's favorite movie. It has to be.
Yeah.
I won't list them all, but the size of the town ended up necessitating the largest development group on the game. While there are 7 programmers across the entire game, there's 11 designers just for the backgrounds. So that would not be including characters or monsters, just the models of the town and the spaces itself.
Oh, wow.
And speaking of, the monsters were designed by Masahiro Ito, another key member who is now iconic to the series. He has also worked on the most recent entry, the short message. The main monster is designed by him. So it's him and the music guy, which we'll get to later, really the only two who still stuck around.
He's not such a noob anymore.
He might still be bad at programming, but just draws good.
He sure showed me.
Naoko Sato was the other monster designer, who is another art student, but she was more interested in books and manga than she was in games, though she was fascinated by a horror game called Moonlight Syndrome, which I think is Japan only. I hadn't heard of it before. Sato designed the more human and bug-like creatures, and she is the necessary spooky goth girl on the team. Big fan of J-horror, influenced by The Ring and Ju-on, and I have a crush on her. Half the monsters, though, the ones who are less recognizable in the real world, were designed by Ito, who cites fucking Russian avant-garde art as a primary influence on his work. His grandmother was Russian, and you can find Russian text in some of his other work, like written into the work itself. Jacob, get ready to correct me on some names. Francis Bacon, Horace Johnson, and Magdalene Albakanowitz were other huge artistic influences for him, and of course the BDSM community through quote-unquote German magazines that he read. He qualifies most of his work as being defined by quote strange head and quote lack of freedom.
That's Francis Bacon is someone who's come up a lot for me lately in the reading that I've done. In part, oh god, it would take way too long to get into. But Francis Bacon seems to come up a lot in discussions around climate change and the degrowth movement and trying to find reconnection with the natural world, because Francis Bacon was particularly known for his viewpoint, basically, that humans our role was to dominate the natural world, and not to integrate with it. So the idea of exploiting natural resources was seen, because of Francis Bacon and his writings, as mankind's duty. That we are the dominating spirit, I guess, in this hierarchy of species, and therefore we get to do what we want. That's what we're supposed to do. And of course, that's led to over-extraction and blah, 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 blah. The end of the world. We get there. But I think the fundamental idea there is dualism. He was the progenitor, basically, of dualism. And just this idea that these sort of two entities are separate and shouldn't really cross. Which, if you really think about it, is kind of what Silent Hill is in the game, right? It is these sort of two worlds.
One family.
Layered on top of one another.
Such a serious point under my...
I'm so sorry. I couldn't help myself. I'm so sorry.
And ultimately, what I'm getting at is that in Silent Hill, the real hero is Tarzan. Tarzan by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And that is all I really... It's actually... I'm thankful for you in a way, because ultimately I was going to keep rambling, pretending that I'm intelligent before somebody inevitably, mercifully cut me off.
I think Harry just needed to put his faith in what he most believed in. Two worlds, but one family. Honestly, okay. Well, it kind of works, though, because Alessa's whole thing is she's like a fusion of two separate people. And so it's two worlds, but she's one girl. But then also she gives birth to herself at the end of the game or something. We'll get there. In pre-release advertising of the game, Team Silent and Konami bumped into several issues stemming from the disturbing content contained within. In the West, the conservative pendulum was swinging back towards puritanical restriction of adult content, which came down especially hard on video games, which were classically targeted towards kids or younger teens. Remember that the ESRB was only established in 1994, just a few years prior to this. A demo for Silent Hill was distributed to Western magazine publishers, but many chose either to not release the demo at all, edited the content, or only showed the opening cutscene. But it wasn't just in the West. In Japan, in May of 1997, an incident took place now known as the Kobe child murders, wherein two school children were murdered by a young teen in a chilling incident that affected the entire nation. I'm not going to go into the details, but because of the Japanese court system, the teen was released less than 7 years later. And at the time of development, Silent Hill actually had childlike enemies that were harmless, but could be beaten with knives, pipes, etc. And again, while I'm not going to provide any details, those items were very close to the murder weapons used by the teen who committed the Kobe child murders.
Is it like, did those eventually become, what are they called, like the gray children? Like those enemies that you found in the school?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so in the original version, you could beat the gray children up even though they were harmless. And I think you might still be able to in the American version, but you cannot touch them in the Japanese version. They just wander around and they're kind of spooky for a second.
Yeah, because the version that we got, like they're armed with knives, aren't they? And they just grab.
There's younger. So that is another enemy. So the gray school, and maybe I'm forgetting the name, but there's little translucent gray guys that are very childlike that don't do any damage to you. But then there's also that initial tiny wandering enemy that does look a bit more like a kid in the American release, but they edited that enemy in Japan as well to make it look even less childlike and human. It looks a bit more grotesque.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah, given the context.
It is uniquely funny that America is all like, we don't have a problem with child murder. You can beat them up still. Wonder where they got that idea.
Still pretty relevant.
We're just gonna, we'll just leave that one. Audience, you can fill in the sad blanks. Silent Hill has many unused enemies, including another childlike enemy, which was censored as a result. Japan itself actually created a rating system called CESA in 1996. It had to approve games for launch. Like, the game could not come out at all. There couldn't be some sort of unrated option. CESA had to say, yeah, this one's okay. Some enemies in the Japanese release are less humanoid to get CESA approval in the first place. And by the way, I feel like I should point out somewhere that if all you, valuable listener, know about Silent Hill is Pyramid Head, Sorry, Pyramid Head is not in Game 1. He does not show up until Silent Hill 2, despite what the movie may have you believe.
That is my partner's biggest gripe with this game, is that Pyramid Head is completely absent.
But speaking of version differences, let's talk translation, or rather, a sort of lack of region differences when it comes to the dialogue. Interestingly, Konami's chief translator was Haruhiko Inaba, a product coordinator in their Japanese offices. But Inaba was fully bilingual and translated/wrote much of the script Toyama came up with ideas for, though final translation is credited to, quote, Latina International Corporation. I'd like to get into those offices if you know what I mean, boys. The script was longer than a usual game at the time, being about 60 pages. Internally, Inaba was actually known as Harry, and so the lead character is sort of named after him. Inaba also did the voice direction, including Harry's voice actor, known at the time only as Michael G. Michael's full identity was unknown until fucking 2018, when he was finally interviewed by William Lockwood from a website called Rely on Horror. His full name revealed as Michael Gwynn. Fun fact, he also voiced Dracula in Symphony of the Night. Michael Gwynn provided some feedback on the script for Silent Hill, which may explain why it feels a little more natural in English than, you know, what is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets?
Perhaps the same could be said of all religions.
Now, Silent Hill has, I think, a bit of a reputation for being weird or stilted when it comes to translation, but frankly, I think it's intentional. Watch some of the Lynch-directed episodes of Twin Peaks, then boot up Silent Hill, and tell me there is a difference between the two things you view. You can't. Everyone else they hired were legitimately professional voice actors, which really makes me think that we're hearing something that is completely intentional and not just a fluke. Interestingly, because the game was set in North America, there is only that English dub. The lines that you're hearing are the same lines that folks in Japan and Europe are hearing. There's just different subtitles between regions.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. The voice cast here is brought directly out of the Black Lodge. That's a Twin Peaks joke.
Now, I got it.
All right, good. Just making sure.
I didn't. I haven't seen Twin Peaks yet.
Oh, man. You should watch it.
My partner is gonna sit through them with me.
It's a great treat.
Pretty excited.
And when you get to Twin Peaks: The Return, the series that takes place 25 years after the ending of the original series, and then also came out 25 years after the fact as well. The very first episode, and I genuinely can't explain this because I was well into my 20s. Like, this is my late 20s by the time I watched it, and very comfortable with myself, what I was into. And yet, that episode is maybe the horniest thing I have ever been turned on by. It just triggered something, and I don't know why, but it did. And so I highly recommend it to anybody.
So it sounds like I should just skip to that episode, right? Like, I don't need to see the originals. I don't need to see the original series.
You won't. If you genuinely, no matter what, you'll benefit from watching the original series. But David Lynch is kind of like a radio wave, right? And you've got your own radio wave as well. And to fully vibe with Lynch, you want to match up your radio waves so that way they're identical. And sometimes the only way to really do that without just decades of meditative practice under your belt is a lot of drugs.
Okay. I don't want to go down that route.
Well, that's for you.
Okay, well.
Then you've got to watch seasons 1 and 2. That's all I'm throwing out there.
Okay, fine. I'll do it.
That was a great description of Lynch. Yeah, you really just have to go in with zero expectations and let it wash over you.
Solid.
Now, Yamaoka Akira is probably the most well-known member of Team Silent, and frankly for good reason. Silent Hill is, as we talked about earlier, defined by its soundscape. Yamaoka is one of the few members of the original Team Silent to stay into the post-Team Silent era, and also composed music for the eventual film. His influence on the series' identity, then, is hard to overstate. But prior to this, he worked on music for Contra, Sparkster, and Snatcher. He left Konami for Grasshopper Software around Shattered Memories, which we'll get to what that is later, but still works on the Silent Hill series as a freelancer, making him probably the longest-serving member of Team Silent as a whole next to Ito. I think he's worked on more games total than Ito has, or maybe right around the same amount. However, Yamaoka was not initially placed on the team. He actually requested to be placed on it while working on other games. His influences are obviously industrial, but you can hear elements of punk and other avant-garde stuff, often being purely ambient. The intention was to create an uncomfortable dissonance. Sometimes there were extremely loud hallways for no discernible reason, or maybe a silence where music would have seemed more appropriate. Here's another kind of long quote from Yamaoka in that same 1999 interview that we referenced earlier.
For Silent Hill, the first thing I wanted to avoid was the revered creator, and what is created by those who revere the creator. This was my first concern. To make something like that would be the height of embarrassment and insincerity, peppering the work with ostentatious eccentricities and making something unbearably pretentious. That was the other thing I was determined to avoid. Of course, being a slave to hackneyed... Hackneyed?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of big words in here, Tyler. I'm kidding.
I know. Well, and I like that he's like, I don't want to be pretentious, but I want to avoid ostentatious eccentricities. And it's like, shut up, man.
Okay, and it is hackneyed, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course, being a slave to hackneyed traditions wasn't an option either. There was no background music in Silent Hill. I tried to depict the sounds that would be heard in the world of Silent Hill if it existed, using the art of conveying sound through air vibrations. The stereotypical sounds that are often described as game music do not apply to Silent Hill at all. I also avoided trying to make cinematic music, as I felt it would sound too intentional. I also tried to think about how people would interact with Silent Hill as a PlayStation game. To that end, my sound design is like a blade sunk into Silent Hill, carving out a space to make it unique from all others.
What a snooty guy. I just love that it's gotta be just a room full of snoots talking about, like, have you seen the newest Jodorowsky film? No, but I listened to the soundtrack. It was phenomenal. Sipping their
wine.
Cocktails? I don't know.
I was going to say probably tea would be my guess.
The thing is, if they're a bunch of artists, they probably can't afford shit, so they're just drinking HRD out of the bottle on the floor of the Konami fucking development room.
I mean, what can I say, guys? I told you I couldn't read.
Do you have a uke translation of this?
Sure, let me just bring out my uke and start strumming.
But Yamaoka wasn't the only musician, of course. Rika Muranaka, who also did that interesting song at the end of Symphony of the Night. Muranaka is a fascinating figure, one who got her start with jazz music. She's worked more centrally with the Metal Gear Solid series, even as recently as MGS5. Her ending theme, Esperamente, for this game, plays only over the bad ending and is in Spanish, interestingly. Now, it only takes the first couple of chords of the music to know that there's something weird going on. That first sound that you hear is, I believe, a mandolin. The sounds that ebb and flow from the game transition from melody to noise in a way that, again, captures the logic of dreams. This is also not to mention how vital the sounds of the in-game radio are, which are one of the few warnings to the player that an enemy is lurking somewhere out in the dark. If you can, I highly recommend playing the game with headphones, as it does operate in full stereo, which can be helpful when trying to locate things in the dark. In fact, it probably wasn't as appreciated in 1999 coming out of a CRT. Now, the narrative here is getting a little longer than I thought possible, but I'd just like to touch on one quick note about advertising before we get to the game's reception. In the West, marketing leaned on, say it with me, edgy. It focused on padded cells, ads showing television sets bouncing off the walls. But in Japan, the game was advertised with a quote attributed to the writer of the Ring book series, a movie that did inspire the game. "Fear the essence is here. Suzuki Koji." That just flashed over the screen with some other stuff. Of course, this is a slight misdirect, and some Japanese fans probably bought the game because they thought he was involved. He was not. They just took a quote from him that... I don't even know what the quote is from. I don't know if he just said it, if they just held up a mic and they were like, say something scary.
Have you guys seen The Ring?
Yeah, I've seen the American and the Ringu.
Oh, nice.
I've only seen the American.
I only watched it for the first time this most recent October. I'd never seen it before then because my mother, God love her, was terrified of this movie. I think it was actually a big reason that we switched over to DVDs in our household growing up. And all this time, she's only ever referred to 2 movies as like my mom's a spiritual woman, but that wouldn't be the first adjective I would describe her with. But she fully believes that both The Ring and The Exorcist are evil.
Oh my God.
So it took me a long time to get around to watching it. That being said, I did see Ring 2 in theaters, and that one is hilarious. It kills Ryan Merriman from the Disney Channel. Such movies as Smart House and The Luck of the Irish. He dies at the very beginning.
Nice.
And they actually killed him.
Yeah, he's never been in another movie. That was it.
That's why you haven't heard of him since.
Yeah,
He
his
died
luck
in
seemed
Ring
to
2.
have run out.
The game released first in the US in February 1999, specifically February 23rd, 1999. Then in Japan on March 4th, and then Europe on August 1st. I don't have exact sales figures, but I know the game was a surprise success and wound up the 43rd best-selling game on the platform overall, moving around 2 million units in its lifetime. Of course, it also got the garish green greatest hits logo treatment, which I think is just especially not good for this one.
It made it, y'all.
Reviews were very positive, though I think the game is still better remembered in retrospect. Here's a review that is just wrong from a fella named Boba Fett on GamePro. A shameless but slick Resident Evil clone. Now, while it's true that Resident Evil was the primary spark, they were initially just aping Resident Evil in the first place, I think the sentiment kind of misses the point of Silent Hill. But still, the game received an incredible amount of praise and attention in all regions, and a sequel was greenlit not long after in September of 1999.
Would you guys, per usual, like to take a guess as to the movie that topped the American box office the weekend after Silent Hill came out?
We're doing the February 23rd,
This
1999
is February 23rd, 1999. And I'll give you a hint in that there's genuine crossover between this movie and Silent Hill.
Well, what I was going to say was Austin Powers 2, but
he got
that
it.
threw me off.
Nailed it. It was Austin Powers 2.
No, I have no idea.
This movie is 8mm. A Joel Schumacher film during the Joel Schumacher era, where you're getting The Lost Boys, you're getting his Batman films, and it stars none other than Nicolas Cage. Nicolas freaking Cage!
I didn't know that movie was like a number 1 kind of thing. I had heard of it, but I didn't realize it was that popular.
That's because back in the 90s, movies were good.
Remember the 90s? Kids these days, they don't know.
That's the entire conceit of the podcast, is to introduce people to the magic of the 90s.
Hey, some of these released in early 2000.
That's fair.
But let's talk about the game itself. We'll start with the plot, where I will try and explain.
I'm so sorry. I must have missed it. What was the movie?
Oh, it's 8mm.
Oh, okay. I thought you. Sorry, I thought when you said that, I thought you said it was shot in 8mm. So I was like, okay, yeah. Let's get to the title.
Get into the technicalities. Fucking film school guy. Fucking Joe Dorowski over here.
Fucking love the idea of a film being shot on 8mm film.
I don't fucking know. I'm not a film guy.
I know you're not. I'm being a bitch. That's what I'm being.
Isn't that what Super 8 is? The fantastic film Super 8?
Yeah, the fantastic film Super 8 is about an 8mm film. And the idea then that an 8mm film topping the box office in 1999 should really paint a picture for you.
I'm not throwing out any possibilities here, or throwing away any possibilities here.
Yeah, keeping
Anything could happen.
keeping your eyes wide open. I respect it.
It was the 90s where everything was better.
So let's talk about the plot. I'll try and go over this one quick. To be reductive, the game is about an everyman novelist named Harry Mason who crashes his car while driving through the town of Silent Hill in Maine, USA. He's driving there for a vacation with Cheryl, his 7-year-old daughter. When he wakes up from the car crash, he finds that Cheryl is missing and sets out to find her in a foggy town, a town that occasionally morphs into a nightmarish vision of itself filled with chains and rotting dead bodies and monsters and other spooky stuff. There only appear to be 5 other human beings in the town. One of them is Sybil Bennett, a young cop with a trim blonde haircut who gives Harry the game's first gun and assists him along the way. There's Dahlia Gillespie, who is a priestess of a cult just called The Order, and her daughter Alessa, another young child around Cheryl's age, hint, hint. And in the hospital, Harry meets Michael Kaufman, a doctor, and Lisa Garland, a nurse. Now, because this is a Japanese game from the 90s, the game buries the lead, and there's much more to it than all that. Cheryl is not Harry's biological daughter, but a baby that he and his now deceased wife found in Silent Hill 7 years before. This only gets revealed in like the last hour of the game. Cheryl is one half of the same soul as Alessa, having split 7 years ago. The Order is a cult that has been attempting to summon Metatron and intends to use the Alessa/Cheryl to birth the demon/god. Alessa may not even be a real girl in the first place, but kind of a conjuration. She splits her consciousness because of the abuse she suffers from the Order and from Kaufman, who runs a drug ring being used by Dahlia to awaken the power in Alessa, and he forces Lisa to care for Alessa, who's like chained up under the town being tortured, to summon the demon. He holds Lisa kind of hostage under threat of withdrawal because Lisa is secretly an addict. Also, Lisa that we encounter in the game is actually dead. She just kind of forgot that she was dead and doesn't realize it. And all of the events of the game are orchestrated by Dahlia Gillespie, who uses a ritual to make Cheryl and by proxy Harry return to the town and forces them to crash the car by astral projecting Alessa in front of Harry's car. Got all that?
No, could you repeat it from the beginning?
This was really helpful, but I need you to actually go into greater detail so that way we can turn this into 3 episodes of content.
This is like literally all info that just gets dumped on you in like the last hour?
Some of it also needs to be inferred a bit. The exact nature of Alessa is also sort of buried, and this goes into the next point, which is that there are 5 endings depending on 2 specific side quests that you can either do or not do, which are not super visible on your first playthrough. You'd probably get one of the bad endings if you're playing through without a walkthrough. In the good endings, Harry escapes with Cheryl, well, not Cheryl, but a baby reincarnation of Cheryl/Alessa. So he doesn't leave the town with his 7-year-old daughter. He leaves the town with a new baby who's also kind of the same baby as before. And Sybil the cop is either saved or not, again, depending on the ending that you get and the side quest that you do. The good plus ending is the canon one, which actually will roll into Silent Hill 3. But in the bad ones, Harry and Sybil can escape without the baby, or Harry just winds up dead in his car again.
I don't know. That seems like a pretty happy ending, all things considered.
And lastly, there is the infamous UFO ending. On a second playthrough, it's possible to trigger an early ending where UFOs with little gray men descend on Harry and blast him with a laser and then fly away with him, and the credits scroll up in that kind of Star Wars opening title scroll way. It's bizarre, it's not canon, but it's pretty fucking funny for an otherwise very serious game, and that becomes series tradition following this. Almost every game has a UFO ending.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because like Silent Hill 2, it was the dog ending, right? The dog ending is the UFO ending?
Yeah, the dog controls a UFO. There's like a Shiba Inu sitting at the controls of a console.
That's awesome.
But yes, to answer the earlier question, most of the plot gets dumped. Harry doesn't always reveal that Cheryl is his adopted daughter. That only happens if you save Sybil, who is one of the bosses actually. Kind of near the end of the game. She gets like a parasite in her and then starts shooting at you. And if you use a specific item that you held over from your first time in the hospital, you can just like toss it at her, and then she throws the parasite up. And then Harry will explain his history with Cheryl to Sybil in that moment. Okay. And then as far as like Alessa being tortured and the Lisa and Kaufman stuff, that also only kind of comes up if you've done a side quest earlier where it's like a motorcycle that Kaufman is storing something in, and so you don't learn all about the drugs, but you can also go to a police station in town that gives some of the drug background, like the drugs that they're giving to Alessa to try and awaken the demon only grow in Silent Hill. It's like a flower that grows along the lake. This is where I start to get a little murky on it, and I would refer everyone to the Silent Hill Wikia.
Sure, that's where I'm going after this.
But yeah, let's get to the game itself. How was everyone's experience playing it? If this was sort of your first time, did you enjoy it?
I did enjoy it. I thought that it was kind of funny, to be honest with you, because of how strange the gameplay was. I thought the way that it took me a minute, of course, to get used to the idea that I think it was the up arrow basically moved you not up the screen, but up relative to the direction Harry was facing. And so that was a cool mechanic but it's tank controls, but then you throw in these wild angles that will surprise you. And it's not like Armored Core where you're centered in the frame always. There's so much variety on the screen at any given time. I really did love the ways in which we were disoriented and the angles that it came up with. Like, it is a very cinematic game in that way. I really could not. I must have spent like 10 solid minutes just moving backwards because I love the way that he reverse gallops back like a horse. It was just really funny. And I could not get over that. No, Tyler, I really appreciated your advice to follow a walkthrough because the map itself is pretty obfuscating, and even I just don't have the time to uncover these secrets of this game like I maybe once would have, nor do I frankly have the patience for it. But to be told hey, go here, and to still kind of struggle to get there made the game really enjoyable for me. Yeah, I did really like it. I also couldn't help but compare a lot of it to the movie. In particular, what's the cop's name? Sybil, right? That character, I can't remember if that's her name in the movie as well. But when I watched the movie, and she is we talk about the BDSM influences from those German magazines, and that's the costume in the Silent Hill movie. It is just the tightest leather outfit, very dominatrix, and yet she plays this straightforward cop. But I was like, this is a petite, busty woman wearing this leather outfit. This is not what cops look like. But then to see it in the game, I was like, that movie's a really faithful adaptation of the source material. I'm impressed.
I just gotta say, so that actor's name is Laurie Holden. She is called Sybil in the Silent Hill movie. The movie she did right after Silent Hill the next year, The Mist.
No shit. Really?
That's so funny. Weird.
Well, Hollywood likes their types.
Cam, how did you feel about the game?
I really liked it. I've actually, before we even started this podcast, I've tried starting the first Silent Hill a couple of times because I've never played it before and didn't get very far. I don't even think I got to the point where you get your first gun. But playing it this time, so I'd have something to talk about for the podcast. I really enjoyed it once I finally sunk my teeth into it and got through that gameplay loop. It's hard to not compare it to Resident Evil. You just can't escape it. But there was a lot of things that I appreciated that Silent Hill does that Resident Evil didn't do. So when it comes to the tank controls, I don't think in Resident Evil you can move while shooting or move while holding your gun up.
Right, you can't even do that until Resi 5.
Yeah, so you're stuck in place in Resident Evil games when you're holding your weapon, but I liked that in Silent Hill you can move forward or backwards, so that really helped keep me alive. I also appreciated some of the I guess the smaller things like on a technical level. So like I brought up just like the audio cues that scared the shit out of me, the awkward discombobulating camera angles when running. But I really liked watching when Harry runs. If he's about to run into a wall, he will put his arms out in front of him to stop him. Like it's not like your generic. Again, going back to Resident Evil, they can just run headfirst into a wall, and not really acknowledge that there's a wall there. But Harry does, and I thought that was a really cool detail.
Yeah, that was because he can. I forget exactly what it was, but he'll be running, and then if you come to a sudden stop, it's not an immediate stop. He
takes his time. He slows down gradually.
Yeah, he slows down, but it's also like I could have sworn it was almost like your feet were moving too fast. Like you come to a stop and then you kind of stumble a little bit. Like that was an element to it.
There's still some momentum that he's carrying.
That's the word.
And I thought that was really cool. But yeah, I'm actually of the games that we've played so far, I think this is the one that I'm gonna continue to play till completion.
Oh, great.
And I don't know, maybe go through the rest of the series because it's been too long since I played Silent Hill 2, and that being my only experience, I feel like I need to expand on that. 2,
if you're going to play 1, 2 is the best.
Was Sony's State of Play, did they announced a remake of this Silent Hill, didn't they?
No, Silent Hill 2.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Team Bloober, who did Layers of Fear, is doing it. And jury's out. I'm not sure.
It did not look impressive.
I don't know. No, not really. They're really doing a Silent Hill blitz right now because you can tell Konami smells that nostalgia money where people like us have enough disposable income, maybe grew up with Silent Hill, and would buy kind of anything that they put out. But the stuff they've outputted, there's the short message, which is free. It's clearly trying to ape on PT, but does so without the subtlety. It's fine. It's fine. It's not. It's like a 6 out of 10, if even that. There's going to be people who absolutely despise it. I thought it was a fine way, a cromulent way to kill an afternoon. But they're also doing something called Silent Hill Ascension, which is like if a crowd voted on Until Dawn, if that makes sense. So you can like vote on choices that characters make, but so far the only clip I've seen from it is there's like a sex cult in the town, and so the only scene I've seen is one character convincing another like, you gotta get in there and fuck every single member of the cult. It's a bonding ritual. I did it, my wife did it, my children did it, and you gotta do it too. It's so fucking weird, man. And then they have one other Silent Hill coming out that hasn't been shown yet. This is stuff I would have gotten into later in the narrative, but that's where we're at with Silent Hill now. Silent Hill 1 has gotten other remakes, which we'll talk about later as well. But
cool.
2 is the one that they're really doubling down on coming up. Mm-hmm. One thing I wanted to mention about Harry's stumbliness is there's one kind of hidden animation in the game where if you position him in front of like a dead body or something on the ground and have him step backwards, he'll trip and fall on his bum.
That's awesome.
What? I'm going to do that. I'm going to test that out.
Which is something that one of the designers put in, and Yamaoka just thought it was funny, and he was like, leave that in.
Nice.
Good choice.
But he is a little finicky to control, and to me, he kind of runs like a Frankenstein. He's got big, square feet, and he's got kind of a lumbering gait. And I'd like to think that the control is awkward on purpose. Like, the point is that Harry doesn't know what he's doing, hasn't handled a gun before, is freaked out and confused. I don't know if that's just me huffing copium, because I want to think it's intentional, but there's such intentionality with so much of what this team did in terms of visual design. To be fair, none of them are game designers necessarily, so maybe they didn't put that level of intentionality into the game portion, but I'd like to think that they did it at least somewhat on purpose.
Yeah, and I tend to subscribe to the point of view that if you can reasonably assume that they made something or that they performed with intentionality, why not?
Yeah, it's all symbolism in books. The authors didn't intend to do that. They just figured it out later on. They were like, Oh, yeah. It does seem like that green thing in The Great Gatsby seems pretty important. Yeah, put that in textbooks.
The curtains were blue.
There's some spooky, scary enemies. So we talked about the little kids. I think they have knives, but they might just grab at you. I think the little kids with knives are in Silent Hill 3, actually. The most iconic are probably like the dogs, scary dogs, a la Resident Evil. There's the winged creatures. And later on, you get a couple of bosses. There is the split head, which kind of looks like a big dog, but then its mouth opens up. Actually, now that I'm thinking of it, those dogs from Stranger Things are just ripping this design off. Oh, isn't it exactly the same?
The second season dogs, yeah, where they're...
The Demodogs.
Oh my god, yeah, the Demodogs. Doug Demodogs.
Doug Demodog. Owner of the Silent Hill Demodome.
Silent Hill Demodome.
No, I think you're right.
And then there's a kind of caterpillar-looking thing, which then turns into a big scary moth that you fight on the roof. And then there are two bosses depending on the ending you get. So the incubator, which is the reincarnated Alessa, looks like the glowing Mr. Burns from the X-Files episode. And I gotta say, that episode would have been out, and they were definitely X-Files fans, I think. That could be a tribute. And then when you're on the good ending route, you fight Metatron, who just looks like Satan. Like the classic kind of
fallen angel,
spooky Lucifer looking. Yeah,
that makes sense.
What I do love, and I know I know that this is also probably intentional considering, what we've been talking about, but I love just how seemingly unfazed Harry is by all of this, like running into like those just weird ass winged creatures, like dogs that look like they're inside out, and then like whenever he meets an actual like other human being, it's never like, what the fuck were those things out there? He's just, there's a weird monster outside. What could that be? What's going on here?
So I thought that too, but this playthrough I noticed he says a line to Sybil when they meet in the antique shop, and he says something like, it's weird, whenever I'm outside, something seems to be happening, but when I get back inside or when the dark goes away, I can't really remember what happened. And so I think it's another dream logic-y thing where, like, he's aware of what he's doing, and you as a player, obviously, are experiencing everything the same. But from the character's cognition, I don't know that Harry is actually processing what's going on the whole time. Again, I got that copium mask held up, and it's just pumping it. I got an IV of copium, but I think that might be the intention.
I could see that because like right after you meet, was Lisa? Lisa was the nurse. Mm-hmm. He tries to explain. He tries to explain what was going on, and then he gets like that headache and passes out. And then he wakes up in the bed, and then Lisa's gone. And I don't even think he comments on her disappearance. He's just like, oh, I better get out of here now.
Yeah. Really, then Silent Hill fails at being a decent game. If it was a good game, it would choose to remove every element from the gameplay experience of what Harry doesn't remember. So ultimately, you should, if, again, Silent Hill were a good game, just be playing a man walking around talking to some people indoors. Would make a great game.
Yeah, frankly, there aren't enough tutorials and pop-up button explanations to make this a really good game.
Yeah.
So there's no crafting system either, which 4 out of 10.
There's no battle pass or microtransactions.
The lack of multiplayer really impeded the game's quality.
The one thing I really like about the way progression through the town works is there's a lot of doors that are jammed. That's kind of like a running almost gag as the series goes along, is like, wow, all these locks and all these doors are jammed, or they can't open for whatever reason. But on the map screen, Harry will have filled in those doors with little like red pencils.
Yes,
I love that.
Like, can't do this, and then it'll auto add if there's a point of interest in the room, so you don't have to know like, oh, the severed hand that I'm going to pour acid on is in that room. It'll say severed hand with a question mark.
Can we just for a second really talk about how great this map mechanic is?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Maps, I don't know what it is. I think actually I have a good theory here. But something about maps make things better. Could be books, could be movies, could be games, but a good map just it's anything can be great, but to be a masterpiece, it must have a map. And I just
especially in a horror game, Yeah.
Yes, and one that doesn't root you exactly in this spot because you don't know. This game would be so much less if you could consistently. Actually, I don't want to make this point because now I'm second guessing myself. Do you see? You don't, do you? On the map, the map's just like a piece of, like if I were to pull out a map right now, there wouldn't be like in Silent Hill, I wouldn't see me here, right? It would just be an outline of the city. Does that make sense?
I think it does show your position.
Oh, does it show my position? I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
I think so. I'm having trouble remembering, but I
No,
think
it does. It does.
Yeah.
Well,
but
dang.
what makes the use of the map to me in this game especially interesting is you really use it to ground you. Like the tool you use the most is the map, especially when you're out in the town, which is huge, like crazy massive for the time.
Yeah, and it just gets bigger. You just unlock more sections as the game goes on.
Yeah.
I thought that when you got that first initial map, like, oh, this is my playing space. Like everything I do is going to be within this in this square. And then you get to the drawbridge, and I'm like, no fucking way, there's more.
And also the ways in which it subtly expands, whether it's a plank that allows you to cross a gap, or that it's all like, no, like this part of the road is completely severed. You do not get to pass this point. So the map does organically get bigger and smaller in very subtle ways.
I started the series with Silent Hill 2, and that first moment when you are walking down a street and just assume you're just going to be on a street, and then there is no street. It's just a big hole in the ground. I think it really speaks to a point that Toyama makes in that quote we read earlier, where it uses, whether you're aware of it or not, you have an expectation of if a map shows that there's a street and I walk down the street, it is assumed that the street exists. But in Silent Hill, the street could just as suddenly stop existing for kind of any reason.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of this is compounded, so you use the map very thoroughly to ground yourself. In the last area of the game, which I don't think either of you got to on this playthrough, it sounds like, there is not a map. And in fact, the way that some of the rooms tie together is not possible, because you can go up to a second floor, but then on that second floor you can go through a door that puts you back on the first floor, and it uses mashed up versions of rooms from earlier in the game. So it's like you're in the hospital, you go to the second floor of the hospital, but then go through a door that's not a stairway, and you're just on the first floor again. And you actually have to use this mechanic, because at one point you need to turn the power off, which means you can't use the elevator, and you go, how the fuck do I get to the first floor? And it's by going through a door that otherwise should just lead to an office, which I think is such a cool subversion of what you've been doing, which is again another microcosm of Silent Hill saying, here's something you think you understand, but you don't.
Yeah.
It just pulls the rug from under you. It severs like your one safety. No, would it be a safety line, or maybe like a safety net? It just takes that away from you at the very end, and that's genius and also fucking terrifying.
Yeah. That last bit is really spooky scary. Another big part of the game are puzzles. There are some word and logic puzzles. Like, did either of you get to the bird and the piano bit in the school?
Yes, that made me mad. I'm trying to think of a better way to say it, but I got very frustrated with that puzzle.
It's I don't know if it's a good puzzle or not. And I think one of the big debates in the Silent Hill community at large is if the game's puzzles are good or not. And not just this one, but the whole series. Silent Hill 3 has some of the most outrageous, gotta know the order that Shakespeare plays were written in, which, hey, maybe we know we went to school for it. But it's kind of a big ask for someone buying a PS1 game in 2002 to know the chronology of Shakespeare shows. But one puzzle requires it, and that information is not contained within the game. And there's also one puzzle that's just programmed wrong. Anyway.
No kidding. For real. Like, that's a real thing.
Yes, no, I'm not making this up.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Any game that makes you fucking feel like you like
get cultured. You fucking kid.
I was just like, it would be tough to be, but it would be neat. I'm like tripping over my words here. It would be, I think, any game that makes you feel like an actual detective by like putting these clues together and not having it feel like, oh, you're limited to just this like little bit of information that the game's given you, but something much larger than that. That's really cool. I'm really into it.
See, there's the debate. This is the very Silent Hill puzzle debate that people have been having for years, is are these good puzzles or not? Silent Hill 3 also has a puzzle difficulty system, so the Shakespeare thing is only on the hard setting, whereas if you go easy or medium, I believe all of the relevant information is there. Oh, is it really?
No, I don't know. I'm just
oh damn, I couldn't remember.
If you make it easier, just like it dumbs down the like literature for the puzzle.
You have no idea what these games are gonna do, man. There's one puzzle in this one that's sort of infamous where you have to count the number of legs on several zodiac signs and then plug those leg numbers in. There's another one where a lot of it is you get a bunch of items, there's text listed, and then you have to find out how the text means you should order the items themselves. So the piano is black and white birds landing on certain keys that are not broken keys, but you have to read the poem itself very thoroughly to understand what exactly it's getting at you. And then there's a later one where you use a puzzle that goes clockwise, like it's the face of a clock, and there's colored tiles that you set in.
That one I could do. That one I felt pretty fucking smart figuring that one.
Yeah, I think that's the good medium difficulty puzzle of the game. I think that might be the best one.
Yeah, the one with the birds and the piano, like really, I guess it was partially because it's not only the information you get from the board within that room. You also have to take into consideration the book that you read earlier when you first get into the school, because that's I think where the real hint is to figure out the puzzle.
That book tells you how to beat the boss. Oh, is there another one?
Yeah, wasn't there in the information desk when you first entered the school? There's like a section, maybe like the registration desk or whatever. But there are 3 different books, and each book references the 3 puzzles within that school, and they each give kind of a hint. So the book that references the piano puzzle is the book that basically says it's the broken keys that you have to focus on, not the keys that work. So that's what messed me up, because I'm trying to figure out all the keys that are working, and like because I think I'm pushing it in the correct order, but I'm not pushing the keys that don't make any noise.
I don't think I saw those books this playthrough.
Oh,
I forgot
really?
About that.
Oh man, they're there.
Interesting. Huh. Wow. But yeah, so Silent Hill, basically the we didn't really mention this earlier, but the progress of the game is you're in a location, maybe the town itself, or maybe like a hospital, a school, or the other one's like a cultural center or something. There's a version where the town's just foggy, but then some sirens sound, everything gets dark, and then you're in a nightmare version. So you'll often be playing on the same map, but the stuff itself is twisted. Doors that might have opened before no longer open. Things are in different locations.
Pieces of the floor missing.
Yeah, exactly. And so again, it's always just twisting expectations. And then sometimes you'll fight a boss. Not really that often. Combat is definitely de-emphasized. And then you go to the next place, and the next part of town opens up. It's not like a Metroidvania where it gives you like a power or like a gun or something. Sometimes you'll get an item, but often the story will just sort of push itself forward. There is also a bizarre ranking system to this game which encourages multiple playthroughs. The game is short. If you know what you're doing, you can get through it in like 3 hours, maybe less.
Oh, interesting.
But a first playthrough is probably going to be like 5 or 6. But the ranking system gives you a star ranking from 0 to 10 based on a number of factors such as number of saves, how much you ran or walked, how many enemies you defeated. The ranking system also affects weapons you can get in New Game Plus, which I think is called like the New Fear or something. You can get a laser blaster, you can get a katana, you can get like a rock drill, I think it's called, and the higher rank you get, the stronger the blaster is, but only on the next run, meaning that you can't just keep running around with a blaster that's perfect every game henceforth, because you can't get a perfect rank if you have the perfect blaster.
Oh my god.
The ranking system's super weird.
No, it's Buddhist, right? You are rewarded for living a good life in the previous playthrough. And if you're too privileged, then that's removed from you in your next life until ultimately you achieve nirvana, which is putting the game down.
Oh my god.
I think we got it, boys. I put in the notes that I don't know that the ranking system is why people play Silent Hill, but after I got to the end of the game this time, I did sort of want to run through it again in a way that maximized it. There is a bit of an impulse there. So there's that surface level of just playing the game and experiencing the story and the spooks and the scares, and then I think there is a way to optimize it, so they're sort of encouraging like speed running, less saving, etc.
Yeah, I mean that could be why the game itself is fairly short. If you know what you're doing, it just adds to that replay value in addition to getting all the endings.
And I would assume some of that is also memory limitation. They couldn't make the game super, super long because they were already kind of stretching the limits of what the system could handle. Like Silent Hill, as we mentioned,
with the lighting.
is big. Yeah, just with the lighting. That flashlight alone shaved off 10 hours of gameplay.
That's wild. And it's limited to just one push of the button. That's insane.
You can't turn the flashlight off, which I think makes the enemies not notice you, but makes it harder to see. I always left it on.
Yeah, I didn't realize... Actually, not until I read this, I didn't realize that you could just turn it off and on with the circle button. Is that what it is? I've always went into the fucking menu to turn it off and on. Same with the. So tell me this: is there a button to reload, or do I have to go into the menu and reload your weapon?
I think you have to go into the menu.
Okay. Then I don't feel as bad.
Yeah,
I don't feel as bad.
That one's fine. Well, and then I noticed a few times that I think he reloads on his own.
He does. That one, I know you could turn on and off, but I wasn't sure if there was a manual way, like if there was a button when you're not in the menu to just, reload.
Mm-hmm. And we should mention there's healing items. It's a...
Yeah, thank God for him.
Healing drink.
For real.
Yeah. It's a healing drink, a health kit, and then a ampoule, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
And the only place that the health is visually displayed is in the menu, and it's just Harry's big ol' head and then a color behind him. Green is good, yellow is okay, red is bad. And you don't get a lot of other sense outside of, I think he pants a little bit if he runs too hard or if he's injured. But
and
otherwise,
you'll feel the vibration in the controller too.
Anyone have anything else to say about the game itself, the playing of the game?
Other than figuring out that colored tile clock puzzle, the coolest thing that I did, which I actually did last night, was feeding the blood packet to the tentacle thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. I just I saw it and I'm like, my first instinct was like, oh, maybe with the lighter that I found, I'm supposed to burn it. And then I saw the blood packet next to it. I'm like, no way. Was this what I'm supposed to do? So then I fed it the blood packet and it worked and I'm like, no fucking way. I'm a genius.
Feed the tentacle.
It felt good. I was like, there's no way this is the actual solution. And then it was the actual solution.
It's like the one easy solution in the game where everything makes total sense. Well, that's not true. There's one where the lighter gets used, you soak something in alcohol and then light it on fire.
Yeah, it was the vines on a grate.
That's it, yeah. So some of that kind of adventure game logic, almost like you'd see with point and clicks, but not as obtuse and absurd. You'd never have more than probably 5 different items at any given time, and it doesn't load you up with unnecessary stuff, except for the melee weapons, which I never use.
I use the axe or the hammer pretty frequently ever since I got it.
Well, because he can move with it, right?
Yeah, and it has a long reach, and it's it deals a ton of damage. so I can save up on ammo with it.
I really liked using the lead pipe at the beginning. Going from, I remember when I first tried using the knife, it just being all like, I can't fucking hit anything with this knife. I'm like, what is the point? Useless. And then you open up the menu and it's all like, we'll do in a pinch, but not very good. And I was like, all right, done with the knife. And then as soon as I got the lead pipe, but we brought this up earlier that like you're allowed to kind of conserve your ammo while you play, but like an elixir in Final Fantasy, every bullet I just kept, and I was all like, no, I don't care how many times I die, I am gonna kill this fucking dog with the lead pipe, and then when it is dead, I'm going to hit it, I'm gonna hit it, I'm gonna keep on hitting it until I'm happy.
Another weird part of the game that it doesn't really tell you that I found through research is there's a chart that shows different weapon efficacies against different enemies. So different enemies take more damage based on the gun, axe, whatever.
I would never have thought that.
No.
Me neither.
Completely obtuse, absurd, nothing I ever would have come across naturally or realized naturally.
I also, like, I wouldn't have thought a PS1 game would do that. You know, I would just assume, not going to be a part of it.
All right. I think we should move on to post-game, meaning after the game's release. So Toyama left Konami shortly after the release of Silent Hill 1, taking Naoko Sato, our goth girlfriend, along with to create the Siren series. Sato would serve as the writer for that series, which is what she wanted to do all along, and the pair has worked with Sony for Siren and then moved to Gravity Rush 1 and 2, also very dreamlike series, but more of the ethereal kind of fun dreams, but also a plot that doesn't make any fucking sense. Toyama recently left Sony and started work on a new survival horror game called Slitterhead, which kind of looks like Silent Hill. It looks pretty good, so we'll see how that turns out. Most of Team Silent has moved on to greener pastures away from Konami, and some left the industry altogether. Of the original four, as we mentioned, Oshima and Imamura both parted with games after Silent Hill 4, and Sato works for Nintendo on things like Mario vs. Donkey Kong. Owaku swapped to writing for Silent Hill 2 through 4 and then more or less departed the industry as well. But other artists would shift around, though Masahiro Ito did stick with Konami and does some monster designs still for the series. He and Yamaoka are the only ones who've seemed to tough it out. Both of them were involved in A Short Message and presumably the upcoming games. Inaba left Konami, but has worked in supervision, translation, and coordination for years since as a freelancer. He's worked on everything from Street Fighter V, Witcher 3, the Final Fantasy series, and most importantly, Connect Star Wars.
Oh, thank God for him.
Feeling like a star, can't stop my shine. Silent Hill 1 has been re-released for the PS3 and the PSP as a PlayStation Classic, but otherwise it is not playable on modern consoles, though there are a few different reimaginings of Silent Hill 1. I'll just go over these pretty quickly. The weirdest one is Play Novel: Silent Hill. This is a visual novel version of the game released for the Game Boy Advance, I think is a launch title. There's some puzzles and multiple endings, and you can actually play multiple scenarios, including as Sybil, and a completely original scenario involving a boy named Andy, which was somehow available as online DLC using something called the Mobile Adapter GB.
I'm assuming we didn't get that in the States?
No, and we didn't even get the Play Novel, so this is all Japan only. I believe a fan translation exists of everything, including the DLC, so you can access this on the English-speaking web if you want.
All right.
Now, in 2006, a film adaptation was released, directed by French filmmaker Christophe Gans. I don't care how I pronounce this one, because I'm going to tell you right now why I don't like this guy.
Christophe Gans.
More like Christophe Douchebag. He replaced Harry Mason with a female character named Rose because he felt that Harry had feminine qualities. I'm quoting there. I think giving more opportunities to women is great, but his reasoning is absolute fucking misogynist horseshit. Here is a quote from Gans in an interview.
It quickly became clear, however, Harry never acted like a masculine character. He was constantly dizzy, fainting, talking to himself, screaming, and in fact was very vulnerable. We didn't want to betray the nature of the game by changing the characters' feelings and motivations, so we felt it better to change to a female protagonist and retain all those important qualities. I don't want people to think that I have been politically correct because we have changed Harry into Rose. There is no political correctness in Silent Hill.
So, yeah, fuck this guy. If there's any men listening who are concerned, as I have been in the past, that you are not masculine enough, know that true strength comes from vulnerability. Please, I want anyone listening to feel free to cry, faint, love your family with all your heart, and if you end up in the nightmare realm of Silent Hill, know that it is fucking okay to be scared.
Dude.
This
Amen, man.
This shit drives me crazy. I just I'll get off my soapbox. The movie, from what I remember, you actually I think probably have seen it more recently than me, Jacob. I thought it was fine but forgettable. Visually it looks good because they consulted Team Silent and Yamaoka did the music. They added Pyramid Head in even though he wasn't in the first game. I don't know. Do you feel like it was good? Okay.
Oh no, I think that movie was garbage. I couldn't really stay awake. However, I do think that this is an accurate assessment. Like visually, it is. So the problem with it is that it's a horror. It's a blockbuster horror film based on existing property being dropped in the mid-aughts. And so there's a style to it that you really have to appreciate. And I'm no like deep horror aficionado, although I feel like I'm doing a really good job of sort of expanding my vocabulary in that way. But that generation, it's just like the film's just, I mean, a lot of it's computer graphics. It looks really ugly. It always feels like the characters, like your main cast is always separate from everything else. And there's just the lack of tangibility to it. But as far as capturing the aesthetic of Silent Hill, when I watched it, I really didn't care. It was playing this game that made me think like, oh, they actually did do a really good fucking job. And I could totally buy into it. And it's fucking hilarious to watch that movie and think about what movie Sean Bean thinks he's in. Because the whole movie, it's like he's the husband who's like back at home and his like wife and daughter have gone missing, right? And he doesn't go to Silent Hill. He doesn't interact with any spooky monsters. He basically just sort of plays a sad guy who like thinks his wife has died and then accepts that she's died. Like I had to think like if he got the script and like only read his scenes, he has absolutely no idea what Silent Hill is at all.
Yeah, you're right. Because at the end, he like shows back up at the house, and they're trapped in like a Silent Hill version of the house, but he's in his normal house.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, which he doesn't die. Sean Bean doesn't die.
It's the one film where Sean Bon or Sean Bean doesn't die.
Sean Bon.
Cian Bien. There's a sequel that was released in 2012 by a different director that is generally not regarded as very good. And the writer of the first film, Roger Avery, didn't come back because he was in fucking prison for vehicular manslaughter. So we have just a pair of excellent captains manning the ship that first
Just
movie.
A couple of guys.
Is he the guy who like got into a wreck with like a 16-year-old girl in the car and she ended up I forget exactly who this was. I
think you're thinking of one of the Kennedys.
Roger Avery, Ted Kennedy, like what's the difference, you know? Chappaquiddick and Silent Hill in the same place.
Passenger was killed. Andreas Zini, I don't know if they were a teenager or not. It just says friend. I don't think it was.
I'm probably mixing him up with someone else.
34-year-old passenger. So no, not a teenager.
Not that far off though.
But either way, I do just want to say that the director of the second movie, MJ Bassett, came out as trans in 2017, a few years after the movie released. So I would almost say to watch her work as a bit of a fuck you to Gons. Because we celebrate and welcome the trans agenda, boys. But anyway, don't worry, guys. Christoph Gans is coming back for a sequel that should come out this year or next, which recently wrapped filming. That is adapting Silent Hill 2, which I'm sure, yes, this is real. Post-production just started, and it's a direct rip of Silent Hill 2, the game.
That sucks.
It's going to be bad. We'll take bets on if the game remake or the movie remake is going to be worse.
Mm-hmm.
So the movies leave a complicated legacy. I don't know how to sum it up. It's a your mileage may vary kind of situation. Watch them or don't. They look cool visually, but they miss the mark in a lot of other ways. Just play the game. A novelization of the first game came out around the time of this first movie as well. It's unknown if any of Team Silent had any involvement in it, except for illustrator Masahiro Ito, who made some new dope visuals and original artwork for it. Again, probably the one involved in the most projects. There is also a mobile game version, which came out in 2006 as well for Japanese phones, as was the style at the time. It's an adaptation much like the play novel, and I don't have a lot to say about it. But the full remake of the first game is called Shattered Memories. It was designed by Climax Studio for the Wii, PS2, and PSP, released in late 2009. It's a reimagining of this first game told with the framing device that Dr. Kaufman is now a psychiatrist talking to a 25-year-old Cheryl Mason, recalling the events of her father's trip to find her, though you don't know that the sessions are Cheryl until like the end of the game. You kind of think you're Harry or you kind of think you're the player. But in flashbacks, you play as Harry and follow the original plot kind of, while it also sort of does its own thing. It's surprisingly good for a Western Wii remake of a horror masterpiece, and I would cite it more or less as the last pretty good Silent Hill game. It's interesting.
I didn't realize. I've heard of Shattered Memories. I didn't realize it was a remake of the first game. I had no idea. I thought it was something.
No, me neither.
Something different.
In a very loose term, it very much does its own thing, and it's got the prerequisite like the Wii points a flashlight, and the radio comes from the Wii speaker.
That's actually fucking. That's
which
dope.
is kind of cool. Again, it's like it's a little kitschy, but it's fun. So let's talk sequels and the history of the series afterwards, because this is the only Silent Hill game on the PS1. So we're kind of wrapping up the whole series here. After about half of the original Team Silent departed, the remainder worked on Silent Hill 2 for the PS2, which was released on September 25th, though I did not list a year. I want to say it's 2001. The game has retroactively overshadowed its predecessor and is in fact one of, if not the best horror game ever made. Silent Hill 2 does not follow the events of Silent Hill 1, meaning you can play them independently of one another. It's being remade right now. I don't have high hopes for it, but I'll be pleased if it's playable. I don't know. The team then made Silent Hill 3 in 2003, which is a direct sequel to the first game, starring the reborn Cheryl/Alessa, known as Heather, returning to Silent Hill to get revenge for the murder of Harry. By the hands of the Order, Harry dies. And then finally in 2004 came Silent Hill 4, The Room. Again,
starring
a completely
Tommy Wiseau.
Separate story from the others. Yes, got it, nailed it. Same thing. And introduced more gameplay systems than others to somewhat mixed reactions. There's a portion of this game where you're in first-person mode in your apartment, which you can't get out of because magic Silent Hill chains appeared, and then there's a big hole in your bathroom that you crawl through, and then it just turns into a Silent Hill game again. It's interesting as well. It's okay, but that's the last one made by the original Team Silent. Following that, Team Silent was mostly dissolved into Konami Entertainment Tokyo, their parent developer, so they just merged into Konami as a whole conglomerate, and the team was sent to work on different projects, but Konami still farmed the IP itself out to British developer Climax Studio, who made the carbon copy, but still, in my opinion, pretty good Silent Hill Origins in 2007, PS2 and PSP, and then the aforementioned Shattered Memories in 2009. But simultaneously, next-gen development for the series for the 360 and PS3 were given to Double Helix Games, who released Homecoming in 2008, Silent Hill Homecoming, an action-heavy linear game clearly meant to appeal to a wider audience. And then finally, the IP was tossed like a slab of meat to unknown Czech developer Vatra Games, who released the aggressively mediocre Silent Hill Downpour in 2012, the first of any games to lack any involvement from any original Team Silent members, particularly lacking in Yamaoka. Also, its theme song is by the band Korn.
All right.
Of all the shit, the series then went quiet after a multiplayer dungeon crawler developed by Shantae developer WayForward for the PlayStation Vita later that same year called Book of Memories. And then, Silent Hill was gone for a bit. But then in 2014, a game called only PT, released for the PS4. It was not revealed until the end of the game that it was an interactive trailer, PT stands for playable trailer, for Silent Hills, with an S at the end, a game that would have been directed by Hideo Kojima in collaboration with Guillermo del Toro and starring Norman Reedus. We cannot possibly go into all the shit that went down after that, but suffice it to say that the game did not release. Kojima was fired and made Death Stranding with that pair of men instead. Konami reduced their console releases in general, not just for Silent Hill, but for everything, focusing on pachinko and mobile titles, and Silent Hill went quiet for about a decade. However, probably smelling that nostalgia money in the water like sharks, Konami has recently announced a whole slew of Silent Hill products, which we talked about earlier. Ascension, there's something called like Silent F. It's a weird one. No, just Silent Hill F. I don't know why I added Silent F. It's double silent. Just called Silent Hill F, which is developed by a Chinese studio called Neobards, who have a track record so far of mostly ports and assisting on outsourcing work. So the jury's fucking out. Blooper Team might do a good job with Silent Hill 2 Remake. They might not. Neobards might do a good job with Silent Hill F, which is being set in feudal Japan, I think. They're removing any modern aspect from it entirely. But my cynical ass has not trusted a damn thing Konami has done in about 10 years, and A Short Message didn't do enough to dissuade me from it, though I liked the design and the music, which again is just the original Team Silent people, so who knows. But I would prefer to end this episode not by mourning the loss of a once transformative series, but by celebrating what we do have. Silent Hill 1 is a game that has only gotten more relevant with age, its art house inspirations then influencing the art of indie creators in our modern age. One need only to look at a game like Signalis, which is my absolute favorite game of 2022, to see the ways that Silent Hill has changed the industry of game horror for the better. If you haven't, please go find yourself a copy of Silent Hill 1, and maybe all of the first 4 if possible, and immerse yourself in the world of Silent Hill. There are many games like it, but something came together here that feels unlike anything else you'll ever play. Appreciate the love and the care that was put into Silent Hill, and demand more from your art. Dig deeper into it, and feel the joys, the pains, and the fears that the creators have poured into their product. Visit Silent Hill and get lost in the fog. You might just find more of yourself in it. Ooh, spooky, scary
Thank you once again for joining us for another episode of Mics and Memory Cards. Please join us again next week for the short, sweet, and admittedly top-heavy story of Dead or Alive. In the meantime, my name's Jacob.
My name is Tyler.
And my name is Kameron.
And you've been listening to Of Mics and Memory Cards.